Hello and welcome to Cambridge, Massachusetts. Tonight I'm with Professor Woodie Flowers. Woodie is the Pappalardo Emeritus Professor of Mechanical Engineering at MIT, and he's also the National Advisor of FIRST, which stands for
Inspiration and Recognition of Science and Technology.
It's a wonderful initiative, and Professor Flowers, or Woodie, if I may say,
please,
has been actually thinking a lot about an issue that many people think about, and sometimes they get confused, which is education. You know? And education is one of these words that, if I may introduce it in this way, sort of like gets thrown around a little bit. You know, a lot of people sort of like put the word education, but maybe it's a complex phenomena that is formed by a lot of different entities that we need to understand and distinguish. And since you have been thinking about this issue a lot, I would like to first ask you, when we think about education, what are sort of like the things that we need to separate and understand?
One of the things that really clarifies a lot is to recognize at the beginning that education and training are very different things. You know, learning calculus is training. Learning to think using calculus is education. Learning a CAD program is training. Learning to design definitely requires education. Learning grammar and spelling is training. Learning to communicate requires education. In fact, it doesn't all break down that simply, but in many cases, learning the parts is about training, but learning the synthesis, the whole, the wisdom, how it fits together requires education. So quite often in this country, for example, I believe that our, quote, education system is actually choking on a failed training system. And most of the focus on STEM is actually about training, and we have to get past that as fast as we can and get to post-STEM so that young people in the developed world will have a chance to be productive enough to offset what we consume.
So in a way, we have been obsessed with like the little formula, or with the with an understanding of the world that has been based on the simple rules that we try to get people to internalize, rather than on sort of like this larger picture that would allow people to extrapolate.
We seem to be very good at creating mechanisms for deciding whether or not what someone crammed into their head last night is still there so that they can check the right box. That's not education. We don't think about, learning how to, I believe that informed creative thinking is what it's all about, all three, all the time. The informed part of the triangle is really easy compared to the other two. Being creative requires a lot of education because you have to know yourself enough to trust your ability to be creative. Thinking is not just, David Foster Wallace gave a famous graduation talk at Kenyon College not long before he committed suicide. He was a very profound and provocative thinker, but the thrust of that graduation talk was that in college you should not just learn to think, you should learn to control what you think about. So getting people to think about what they should think about is a meta level of that corner. The creative part, I believe that when you're a student, you have a shot at being in a protected environment so that you can try to be creative and be successful enough times that when you actually start in a professional life or the rest of your life, you have a creative self-image that's robust enough to withstand several your baby is uglies, because that will happen. So if you're going to be a creative person, you have to be a tough creative person. So we're buried in the becoming informed corner when the other two corners are really, really important. And now, people have to be responsible and know that they're responsible for training themselves. There was a time when if you knew some things, you could have a whole career. And then, no, that's not enough. You have to know things and be able to solve some problems. Oh, that's not enough. You have to know things, be able to solve problems creatively because they've gotten harder. Oh, that's not enough. You've got to be able to communicate and ethically work with groups that are multidisciplinary and work on really hard problems. So the number of layers that have been added to being a successful professional continues all the time. Informed doesn't get you to those other layers.
So the educational system, in a way, is one that is geared towards a more primitive economy than the one that we currently have, because our economy, as you're describing, requires us to participate in teams to solve complex problems, not necessarily to know the facts.
Not just the economy, but society. I mean, Martin Seligman's new book, Flourish, talks about well-being and the components of well-being. And he actually fusses at the economists for measuring the GDP very carefully, but not measuring the well-being of the citizens as much. So to know enough to be chosen so that you can get in the game, so that you have a shot at getting some satisfaction and having a meaningful life is a pretty sophisticated thing.
And should we explore different routes? Because our system, as you describe it, is a system in which it's geared towards training. It's not geared towards creativity, or it's not geared towards critical thinking. But if we have failed now in this system that is to try to teach people techniques or to train people in facts and methods, how we can go from our failed system in this corner of the triangle to actually a system that would include these two dimensions that we're missing? How we should expand? What are the alternatives that we could explore?
Well, the total transformation is a big thing. Simply put, societies get the best of what they celebrate. And right now we're kind of drunk on celebrating a lot of the wrong things. But if we don't have to change society yet and we want to work on the education problem, let's just focus there. I believe that an advanced education system would outsource training to a modern, well-produced, coherent digital system that would replace the function of textbooks. The Khan Academy, Sal Khan has used the language of inverting or flipping the classroom. I agree. I wrote a chapter for a book 12 years ago in which I argued that we need to do that so that you use digital media that's highly produced for the commodity things. So you train yourself in calculus, and then when you get together with experts, you become educated about how to think using calculus. You and I right now are using our most precious resource, our time. We're human to human. So we shouldn't use this kind of stuff for training. We should do that on my phone while I'm commuting or whatever. I sit it on the screen and I have a system that's tailored to me. For example, very quick example, in the United States, 600,000 college freshmen take calculus every year. 42% fail. 250,000 fail remedial calculus in college. If you say that $2,000 is a reasonable price for that failure, which is very conservative, it's much higher than that at MIT for sure. That's $500 million. $500 million. Now, that's the cost of the movie Avatar. That's what the rumors say. 1,000 people for 4 years made that movie. They were all the best in their field. We've never done anything like that in, quote, education. If we did calculus with 1/10 of that, I believe we could cut that failure rate in half. If you look at the value, the present worth of a continuous stream of $500 million a year for one country, for one course, at one level, it's a huge number. At today's interest rates, the present worth of $500 million a year is essentially infinite. So as an investment in the culture, solving that problem is really worth doing. So I believe we should do it. And if we did it and we had 1 million users, they'd be getting better all the time. And Sal Khan is now doing this with the Khan Academy. He has some of his hedge fund friends that are doing the statistical analysis to learn what works and what doesn't. We must do that. We must get, if I were Woodie Flowers and I wanted to study differential equations, and I had taken this new media learning style evaluation quiz that would be part of the front end of this that I would have done early in my life, I would know that I really don't like this symbolic manipulation math stuff, and I really need I have to have some gravitas, and I'm also ADHD and I don't pay attention, so I'm going to pull down differential equations, what I want to study, and the next menu is going to be, I want to study it in the context of mechanical engineering because that's what I want to be, and the next is, I want it to poke me every 5 minutes because I know I'm not going to want to pay attention, so it's going to have to ask me a question to check in on, make sure I'm paying attention. And I also know that, I don't know, just to try it out, I want to use this old style thing and I want to do it in lecture format. So then I have to pick the voice. I need some emphasis, so I want Walter Cronkite's voice because that'll make me pay attention. But I think because she's got this absolutely beautiful midsection, I think Lady Gaga ought to be the visual avatar for my differential equations course. We know how to do all that. We could do really elegant things. And if we did that and we got people's attention and people were empowered to go train themselves ad hoc, I need to know Kalman filter theory. I'm an engineer, I go learn that. That works. Then you come back with your colleagues and you learn what really applying a Kalman filter to this new robotic system really means. And that's probably education. So train yourself, spend time with your colleagues in maybe a social setting and with experts to become educated. And it's that piece, the education piece, that I believe is the biggest challenge for students in the developed world.
So if I can rephrase to see if I understand correctly, you say that there's all of this part of training that could be offloaded to a different type of media, but at the same time, you're saying that the media that we have been using probably is not the most adequate, that we could do better. We could do better given the technology that we have, given that, like what they do in Hollywood and what we do for kids' textbooks are sort of like, orders of magnitude different in...
Completely different ends of the spectrum.
But your vision would be that if we would develop media for education would be at that level, that we would involve people that traditionally has not been involved in developing educational content, and we would do like big budget productions that ultimately could help people train themselves so that they can use the time to educate themselves now in a social setting while discussing and applying what they have learned through the training.
Sure. I mean, in this new media world, why wouldn't we have Disney do the story of calculus, and Pixar do the animations, and Electronic Arts do the testing for the gaming, and Apple do the interface, and Google do the backbone? And we have a whole bunch of deep expertise that we're not yet using. And I believe the university system could be the coordinating body that brings that all together. We don't, in commodity courses, the stuff that the place that we're failing most tragically now, we don't need elegant college professors for the content. We need some good, careful cognitive thought about the pedagogy and the path and to make sure it's consistent. But we need production value and coherence. E.O. Wilson's book, Life on Earth, is a beautiful example of what can happen. The first 2 chapters are out now and they're available for the iPad through the iBook store. He has members of his team one of them is a MacArthur Prize winning animator that did a major part of The Inner Life of the Cell, which is a beautiful, beautiful animation. He sent most of his team to Hollywood. They're off in Africa with very elegant camera gear doing videography and stuff. And the textbook is an interactive media thing. It's got built-in movies, it's got things you can touch and move and look at the other side of, et cetera. We need to do that. It's obvious that we need to do that. And whoever does it first and uses the feedback to make it better will probably own that space, because no one will ever be able to catch up if you keep getting better every day.
But I know that you don't only have been talking and writing about this topic, but you also have been doing, there's a very historical course at MIT, and you also use the word first in the last couple of paragraphs. So can you tell us a little bit about like the way that you have been sort of like pushing this idea of engaging people in different ways to learn?
I was very lucky when I was young. I had a great pair of mentors, but my mentor for engineering was my father, who was a welder, general repair guy, terrible businessman. We were absolutely dirt poor. I grew up in a very small town in Louisiana, and we never owned a home. And I didn't have a car to date in high school, so I built a hot rod roadster so that I had a way to invite girls out. And it was a hillbilly hot rod roadster, but it was the fastest, most dangerous thing in town. And I was lucky to have survived that. But when I became an engineering student, all those equations meant something to me, because I actually had some multi-dimensional impression about what steel was like and what engines were and things of that sort. I brought to the symbolic representation of engineering a lot of understanding that was in different parts of my brain and different parts of my body. So when I started teaching at MIT while I was a graduate student, I was very interested in making sure that students had done something with their hands so that devices had more meaning, that they connected with Mother Nature. Mother Nature is quite wonderful in that she applies all of her rules all the time. And she gives you very unvarnished feedback. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So it's a great way to learn. So I started with, in the course that used to be 270, that is now 2007, the kit of materials, build a robot to accomplish a specific thing. That course was a wonderful experience. And the nice thing that happened that was probably more important than anything else was that the MIT students accepted the challenge of taking this kit and building a thing to accomplish something. No big surprise there. They did a very good job of that. But they also accepted the challenge of competing like crazy, but treating each other nicely in the process. And they impressed me so much with the way they responded to that challenge that I started referring to that as gracious professionalism. So while I was hosting the television show Scientific American Frontiers, several people made connections with Dean Kamen, and Dean Kamen is a wild, wonderful, smart inventor, one of the most brilliant people on the planet, very high energy guy. He had started a museum-like experience in Manchester, New Hampshire, where he's based. But he's looking for ways to expand it. So we met and we talked, and I said, here's a segment of a program about the competition at MIT. We can do that. And he said, that's great, let's do it. So in 1993, he and I co-founded the first robotics competition. And gracious professionalism is one of the cornerstones of that. So compete like crazy, but treat each other nicely in the process. Students like doing that and experiencing the way it feels. So FIRST is now, Dean is a really high energy, well-connected guy, and I believe that FIRST is well-grounded, and there is, from very young kids in junior FIRST LEGO League to FIRST LEGO League to FIRST Tech Challenge, to FIRST Robotics Competition, which is high school level, pre-college. There are 300,000 young people involved this year with 100,000 adult volunteers in 60 countries. In fact, in your home country, Chile, there's some wonderful, wonderful things that have happened with FIRST teams there.
Maybe you can tell me a story from there?
So, well, Jose started a FIRST LEGO League team at one of the publicly supported children's cancer hospitals in Santiago. And I visited those kids, and most of them had no hair and they didn't feel very good. They were in chemotherapy and in radiation therapy. They were struggling quite a lot, but they were very proud of their robots. They had built the robots, they'd learned to control them, and their mentors were some people from industry, some kids from the university with Jose, and some of the therapists in the hospital. They won local competitions to the point that they got to come to the championship that was in Atlanta in the Georgia Dome that year. The kids were just alive. They were just amazing. I was thrilled to get to hug a bunch of them. They were so excited to travel out of the country. These were kids that came from very poor neighborhoods in Santiago. That whole thing was so successful that some physicians got a grant to study First Lego League as a therapy for kids recovering from cancer. So, but you know, first is if you go through a first season without a tear in your eye, you need psychiatric help immediately, because it's stunning to see some of the things that happen. Two quick stories from the big robot competition. The big robots are 130 pounds and could move faster than you and I, and this year they're shooting basketball shots, and the good ones can beat a human quite handily. But I used to start all the matches. I was the MC for all the matches. We now have 50 different competitions. I can't do that anymore. So rather than accept things from the teams like pins and things to drape on your vest, Mardi Gras style stuff, I get their autograph. So I wear a new shirt every year, and I get autographs from team members and mentors and people. And that shirt ends up with about 1,000 signatures. So I'm confident that I have now about a dozen shirts that have a whole bunch of Nobel Prize winners and maybe the first woman president of the United States. I don't know. You know, there's a lot of great autographs to have. But I was attending a regional that I'll leave unnamed because there's some confidential personal information, but a team was coming off the field. Their mentor was a really big guy with a very deep voice. And so I said, you know, sign my shirt. And he said, yeah. And while he was signing, I said, tell me about you. And he said, well, I'm just an ex-con that found God in first. It was kind of a jolt, you know. You got to come meet my team. So I followed him over and met the team. And they signed my shirt, and one team member was standing back, and she had her arms crossed under her hoodie. And so I said, do you want to sign my shirt? And she nodded. So the team members went over and pulled up her hoodie so she could get her arm out, and she very carefully signed. And as we were walking away, I discovered that she was being very careful because she had an incision that was to repair a knife wound. When she announced to her gang that she was leaving the gang to join First, they tried to kill her. So there are stories like that. Other extreme, simple little happening at a First event. In Boston a couple of weeks ago, adult pushing a stack of toolboxes to go along with helping the robot when it needed help. On top of that was a whole bunch of nuts, bolts, screws, 1,000 things. They hit a bump, over it went, stuff scattered all over. So a friend of mine, who is audiovisual, Steve Sargent, wonderful supporter of First, lunged to try to help to pick stuff up. He wasn't fast enough. So he gave me pictures of all the students that just jumped in immediately. So there's wonderful pictures of different team numbers on their t-shirts. All different teams from everywhere immediately put them all back together, sorted them out, and put it back together. So this spirit of we're going to be out on the field competing like crazy, but we're helping each other and we're getting to know each other and we're sharing signatures, all that stuff is really nice. And it's young people working with experts, becoming educated. They went off and trained themselves about how to program the robot, but they became educated about how to tackle a really big, complicated problem. And the biggest prize in First is not winning the robot competition, but it's the chairman's award at the big robot level. There's a comparable award at all the levels. And it is essentially for the most exemplary relationship between the team and the community. And the things that the teams do in the name of FIRST are just amazing. You know, they take their robots to homes where people are not able to get out, and they make things for people. They distribute energy efficient light bulbs. They do all kinds of amazing things. I love FIRST, by the way.
No, I can see your passion, and I think it's you know, it's beautiful and so inspiring. And one of the things, I think there's another analogy that comes in, because before we were talking about education and sort of like textbooks and new media being sort of like movies, but here I see a very strong analogy with sports and having people participate as a team in this engineering, robotics competition, and educating themselves appears to be a better, maybe even team building exercise than the traditional sports that we have, you know, so.
I think it's definitely more relevant. You know, as I said earlier, societies get the best of what they celebrate, and in this country, most college alumni are more interested in their college sports teams than the academic part of their school. That's crazy. That makes no sense whatsoever. I mean, how did universities get in the business of being Saturday afternoon television entertainment? You know,
I did my PhD at Notre Dame, so.
Well, you know, and I know much more about Notre Dame sports than I know about their academic program.
I'm sure. Now, although it's a wonderful school at the same time, you know, but I remember being there, like the tailgates are historical. It's kind of like you double the population of the town just for people coming to see the games. Now, I wanted to ask you like a couple of more questions, because I think this is a fascinating topic. The first one, you know, is I think here at MIT the tradition of actually having classes that are practical and that students work in projects is sort of common and it's trivial and everyone sort of like is used to it. But I would say that is, and in your experience probably you have found the same, that is not common everywhere else. You know, in a lot of places people still think of a college education in something that there's a faculty that would, you know, train students in a certain set of contents and then, you know, ask them, you know, to do homework or to, you know, do tests and whatnot. Now, how do you conduct one of these classes? You know, just kind of like from a practical perspective, if you would be advising now a new teacher that is saying, I always was in an educational system that they only taught me how to train, and I was trained. Sure. And now I've seen the light. I would like to do a project-oriented course for the first time. How would he or she get prepared? What would be your advice of sort of like where to get started?
Well, you've heard me saying that the students should expect to do informed creative thinking all the time. The teachers have to do that too. And we have not chosen in this country to select the best teachers in all of education. You know, that we have to fix that problem. And I believe one of the things that could happen is if we had this super training system that was digitally based, teachers who could do nothing other than write things on the blackboard and give multiple choice quizzes kind of wouldn't have any function. So the ones that would be left were the ones that were good at coaching and working with students. Now, obviously, if you're teaching a philosophy course, the work with part means you're having a very carefully constructed discussion about what the students have read. And the mental acuity of the philosophy professor is really important. She has to tie it all together, has to make it make sense, and has to make it resonate in the kid's mind. In engineering, doing things in the time that it was classical lecture time is a big challenge for all universities because we have a huge investment in lecture seats and classrooms. I believe in many cases that's kind of irrelevant way to spend your capital. We don't need places for monologues anymore. 50-minute monologues by no one's measure is the best way to, quote, educate. So when I was doing 270 many years ago, when I first got involved with the course, the students didn't come to class much. I started doing things with them. And one of the really easy ones was learning to think and see. You know, I love art is a very important part of engineering, and it was very interesting that the kits that we gave the students they were to build the robots from, maybe would have a little motor in it. And so one of the exercises when they came into class would be sheets of paper, and they would take one from each stack, and they knew that if there were 6 sheets, I was going to have them do 6 exercises. So one thing I might do is say, without looking at your kit, draw the motor in the kit in proportion and in as much detail as you can. It's not rocket science to figure out that if you have not looked at it and you don't know that the shaft sticks out 3/8 of an inch and that the contacts are on the top side, et cetera. If you don't know that stuff, when you try to visualize a design around that motor, you fail. It doesn't work. So we accept that studying poetry requires that you actually study the poem and actually memorize. If you had to hold the motor and say, you know, just go through all of the, you know, just describe it to yourself. So one of the ways it was easy to make that point was sometimes I would say, I'd take a grasshopper, for example. So the students would all be there, and it was a big lecture hall, 200 students, you know. And I'd say, draw a grasshopper, and it'd be a universal moan. Oh. And they would draw something that mostly looked like Jimmy Cricket, you know. And then I would go to the blackboard and I would describe, I would say that, you know, the grasshopper's general shape is like this. And actually the head is the same shape, and the mouth parts are kind of jagged and funny, and the eye is not round at all, it's kind of D-shaped, and the antenna actually comes out under the eye. Isn't that amazing? So as I went through drawing the grasshopper, you know, the back leg is the one that they're famous for. It looks like this, and actually the second set of legs, and by the way, they're insects, they have 6, and so in the front set, you know, so I would talk about everything that I drew. And then the next time they came to class, I would say, draw a grasshopper. And the difference between the first grasshopper and the second was profound. So just by looking, you know, you acquire a new way to think about things. So in that course, doing something every time they came to class that was not something you could ask your buddy to take notes on so that I could find out later, because I really don't, you know, it was an experience, and they shared and did things together. In the senior design course 2009 in our department now, Dave Wallace has taken that whole thing to an incredible level. And the price you pay for that is you have to think and plan. You have to make trips to the local stores to get stuff. You have to, it's much harder than picking up your notes and going in and writing on the blackboard. But we can't afford to do that anymore. The cost of 200 tuition-paying students in a lecture hall is so much. We owe them so much more than reciting something that they could read in other ways or do an interactive digital experience with in what's going to come in the future.
Now, one of the things that I tend to think a lot about is how measures sometimes affect systems and they distort them. You know? And when you grade or when you have to, you know, teach and you need to evaluate students, there is kind of, because of time constraints, sometimes I found a big incentive for a teacher to ask a question that would be one that would have a mathematical solution, because they're much easier to grade than narrative questions or than problems, you know, that would require them to do things. You know, do you think that in part a little bit of the system that we have is one that, because of the way that we have been measuring and evaluating, you know, because of our push for always trying to put this into these quantitative measures that are with high frequency and for every unit that we teach, that have caused a system that tends to reward people with some type of intelligences more than others, and tends to reward some type of, intellectual activities more than others, or?
Sure. I mean, a lot of people have studied the correlation between making high grades and being successful in careers, and the correlation is weak at best. You don't get hired to check the right boxes in multiple choice things. You get employed to do much more complex, fuzzy things than that. But the evaluation process is more intense, but I believe it's a solvable problem. In the design courses that we have done here, I would always have, I believe, much more information about the students than if I had given them 4 quizzes and a final. The other thing that we would always do is do evaluations. I'll give you the very simplified version of it just to make it quick. 3 times during the semester there's an evaluation. In the senior teams, they're teams of 20, big groups. It's a problem too big, a time too short, a budget too small, and a team too large, because that forces a different kind of activity than people traditionally have done. So a third of the way through the course, if there's 20 people in the team, each person gets the names, and you have a fictitious $20,000, and you're to allocate bonuses to yourself and your classmates equitably. So you distribute that money. So the first time you do it, you just give the data back to the individual. The instructor doesn't see it, so only the person that was evaluated sees what your colleagues said about your contribution. The dialogue that goes with that is to say, if you got a very high bonus, congratulations, but be careful. Your colleagues will expect that to continue. So you set a high bar for yourself. If you got kind of a neutral one, you have some work to do. If you got a low evaluation, one of 2 things is happening. Either you're not doing your part or you're not communicating well about what you're doing. So if you got a low evaluation, work on it. The second time in the semester, the evaluation occurs, the student and the instructor gets the feedback, and the final one, only the instructor gets it. So you have 3 slices that can be generated. You can create bar graphs. So you have a lot of information about how each individual behaved in the team. So I would do my evaluation of the students and then look at their evaluations of one another. And if they were in line, probably fine. If they were different, then I had to look carefully at what was going on. But most of the time it'd be very, very close. Because if you've worked with someone, you know a lot about their willingness to contribute and their ability to contribute.
So one way also to think about it from the point of view of networks, old school type of training was in which the teacher was the hub and all the students were connected. And what you have been doing in a way is, in order to move from training to education, is to also get the students to connect to themselves, not only so they can educate themselves, but also even to give each other feedback, and they're becoming evaluators themselves.
And I think that's much more natural now. I mean, there's so much, this whole social networking phenomenon is so big and so important that I think it's in the system, and it's much easier to do. When we first did those evaluations, they were done on paper, and I'd go out to the bandsaw and slice the stacks of paper up and give the people their slice. Now it's done with an elegant, publicly available grading tool that Dave Wallace wrote. So you can go to the site and download that to use that grading tool in other courses.
That's very cool. So I think we have had a wonderful conversation about a very different way of thinking how we can help people educate themselves and go beyond training and try to offload training into a more mechanical maybe set of tools or more digital technologies. Now I wanted to go a little bit into not your work but you, into Woodie and his life history. And I want to start by asking, where did you grow up? And then if we can go from there to actually have a brief overview of like your life, your career, and sort of your history.
So as I said earlier, I grew up in a very small town in Louisiana. Name of the town is Gina. And we were very poor, but my father was an interesting character. And he was an inventor and terrible businessman, but did a lot of clever things. And he was very creative. And I believe he set up his own peer review system because he would tell people in town, I'm going to take a widget and a Framitz and put them together and make a thingamajig. And everyone would say, Abe, you crazy SOB, you can't do that. And after he had had several people tell him that, he would then go do it and take great pride in saying, see, I did it. So I think he had some influence. I have taken a different path in many ways. But in my senior year in high school, I did not plan to go to college. My social studies teacher noticed that I couldn't fully extend my left arm, and he said in the vernacular of the time and the place, boy, we got to get you declared a cripple. So I said, okay, and I went to a hospital 40 miles away, and an orthopedic surgeon looked at me and said, this boy needs rehabilitation, wrote a letter to the state, so I got a rehabilitation scholarship. My plan was to get a job in the oil field and buy a Corvette, because that would be much nicer than my hot rod, my hillbilly hot rod. Everybody said college, an opportunity you can't turn down. So I said, okay, went off to go to college. And I got to school, it was not an engineering school, and everybody said, you know, you're going to have to work hard. So I think I had a very nice blend of insecurity and determination, so I worked really hard. And then that got me into an engineering school, Louisiana Tech. I arrived there and everybody said, you know, you did okay at this other school, but this is really serious stuff. So, you know, so I was insecure and worked hard. And as I was graduating from Louisiana Tech, I listened to all my friends and they were talking about their job offers and stuff. And I said, you know, I can get a Corvette now. You know, I can go, I can get some clothes and help the parents pay off some debt. So I was excited about that. And my department head called me in and said, have you applied to graduate schools? And I said, what? And he said, you should. And I did. And I got admitted to MIT. And everybody said, that's an opportunity you can't turn down. So I gave up on the Corvette and came to MIT. And I was finishing my master's degree, and I had a job offer from Humble Oil, so I could go work in the oil field. And by then I wanted a Porsche. And my supervisor called me in, Robert W. Mann, said, have you signed up for the qualifiers exam? And I said, no, and he said, you should, and I did, and somehow I passed the qualifiers exam. And everybody said, PhD at MIT, an opportunity you can't turn down, so I gave up on the Porsche. And the same thing happened at the end of my PhD with regard to joining the faculty. One of the senior faculty said, we have a slot, you know, you will put your name on it if you will commit to accepting it. So over the weekend, my wife and I decided, yeah, opportunity I can't turn down. So then in my first 25 years or so, the only conscious decision that I made was to ask Margaret to marry me. And I did that really well. I nailed that one. But the rest of it was kind of running in a slot, having people slap me on the rear saying, keep going.
And in a way, like the education change, you know, your priorities, the Corvette, you know, like
I
what
drive a truck now.
You drive a truck now?
But I've had 4 race driving schools. So,
oh, okay. And is it like just going back a little bit to what we were talking before? I remember from some of the things that I was spying in you that some students have similar experiences after they take your course, that their objective in life or the type of things that they think that they're gonna do before and after are not the same. Can you tell us a little bit about like?
Well, I think probably the most obvious example was when I started a freshman seminar called How Things Work. And that was pre-word processing and computer graphics. But each semester, I would start the semester by telling them about how a bunch of things work, like cameras and scuba gear and locks and stuff. And they would make a list of things they wanted to know about. So they'd make this long list, and the students would pick topics for themselves, 2 to do on paper and 1 oral presentation. So during a semester, we'd create a book. So we'd How Things Work book, and everyone was responsible for learning what everyone else had written up. That was really fun because we'd have quizzes, you know, and I would bring in something and say, you know, what's this? And occasionally they would bring in things and give me a quiz. So the rule was that I either had to give the right answer or make up a story and try to convince them, and they would vote. And they were very hard to fool. But at a time when MIT was probably 15% women, there were over half the class was women. And I do surveys, and universally they said, you know, we're taking this course because we've been culturally deprived of opportunities to know how things work. And I believe, like learning to look at a motor to know that you can design with it, or looking at a grasshopper to know that you can sketch it, if you get infected with the notion that you can know what's inside a vending machine, or a pen tumbler lock, or a sewage treatment plant, or whatever, if it becomes part of your self-image to know all those things, just like it is to read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, or however, then that has a long-term impact. And I would love to claim credit for the success of some of my students, but I wouldn't dare do that. I mean, I've been so lucky. They have mentored me in wonderful ways. And the wonderful thing about them is that so many are now outstanding and were outstanding when they were students. I hope I may have changed their direction a little bit, but they had a lot of steam when they hit, so.
That's a wonderful message, and I think it's, you know, it's wonderful the way that you have been rethinking these problems. You have been connecting people, and you have been empowering them, and they have been empowering you. You know, it's a beautiful example. I think that is very much, you know, worth first, you know, trying to understand, and then hopefully, you know, we can try to educate each other as educators, you know, to try to follow the lessons that you have given us, Woodie. Thank you very much for coming to Cambridge
Nice
Nights.
to be here. I hope everyone in the audience will take away the notion that they should find at least one new mentor every year.
One new mentor a year.
And become educated by them while they train themselves.
Well, that's a good message.
It's been fun.
Thank you.